Hi, my name is Pablo Requena, and in this video I'm going to be talking about the differences between a classical and a flamenco guitar. Now, there are already a lot of information online. There are many videos on YouTube where they talk about the differences between classical and flamenco from the musical point of view, from the player's point of view, and the kind of sound that they both can produce and how different they are. So I'm not really going to talk about that. What I'm going to talk about is from the maker's point of view, and also in the light that many of the people who have bought my course, which is available to buy online, just in case you're interested, you can find it on my website, which is www.onlineguitarmakingcourse.com. And in that course, I focus on the classical guitar, a very traditional, straightforward classical guitar, which is what it's been taught in that course. But I have people who have been asking me, okay, if I buy that course, will I be able to build a flamenco guitar as well? And also I have students who have already bought the course and they would like to also build a flamenco guitar. Now, what I'm not going to do is to do another course to build a flamenco guitar, because the thing is that you will see how 90% of the construction it's very, very similar. So what I would like to do is, from the basis of the course that it's already available, I would like to see what things need to be done differently to be able to build a flamenco guitar rather than a classical, but from the premise that we are starting with the video course on how to build a classical guitar. So I normally don't have notes on my videos, but in this one I've made a few notes because I want to make sure that I don't forget anything. And so I got a few bullet points to basically explain what the differences are. And in the description of the video also I will describe these points, just in case you don't want to be having to write down stuff while you're watching the video. However, I'm going to explain it in such a way that all you need to do is to press pause and you can make some notes if you feel that's the way you want to do it. Because inevitably, obviously, as I'm speaking, there's going to be a lot more information than what it will be in the description box of the video. So the first thing that we're going to talk is about the choice of timbers. So when you build a classical guitar, it's very normal to think that you're going to be using Indian rosewood or some kind of rosewood for the back and sides, and then for the front you're going to be using spruce or cedar. So that's the average, that's the most normal. There's also people who choose to use let's say maple or use walnuts. There's a range of timbers that you can use for the back and sides, which it will contribute to the kind of color and tonality that the guitar will have. For the soundboard, the same. Whether you use spruce or cedar, you're going to have different qualities there. On the video, I show how to build a classical guitar using spruce, but it's fairly similar if you wanted to use a cedar top. Now, if we're talking about flamenco guitars, then it's quite different, because here we have two types of flamenco guitars. We have a flamenco blanca and a flamenco negra, so a flamenco white and a black flamenco. So the most traditional flamenco guitar that you will come across is the white flamenco, the flamenco blanca, which is built with cypress back and sides and a spruce top. So I have here a couple of bags that I'm working on, and you can see this is a beautiful cypress bag which is already been joined, cleaned and everything. I haven't got any of the bars. There's still quite a lot of work to do here before it can come into the guitar, but at this stage you can see how it's quite a pale piece of wood in comparison with this is not rosewood, actually this is pau ferro, which is also a timber that I highly recommend and I use very often to build classical guitars. But the density, it's basically a lot higher in density than cypress, and that contributes to the difference in the sound. Now for the flamenco blanca, you're gonna get certain type of tone and colors in the sound, which again we're not gonna discuss too much here, or well, not at all really. But the other option is the flamenco negra. Now the flamenco negra is also wanted because of the qualities of the sound, which is slightly different to the flamenco blanca, and really all you need to do is to use Indian rosewood or any other denser timber, which is gonna give you quite a different response. Now with the traditional flamenco blanca, most of the time you'll find that people are using spruce for the soundboard. That's also my preference. There are many people now who are also using cedar with a flamenco blanca. That's okay, you get quite a punchy sound, quite different to the traditional, but it's also very acceptable and quite common nowadays. For the flamenco negra, the same, you can use spruce or you can use cedar. My preference is to use a cedar top with the flamenco negra, because that also contributes to the type of sound that I like, but this is got to be what you like and it needs to be what you want to do. So I would imagine that by now you have a more or less an idea of the kind of sound that you want to produce with the instrument that you want to make. So that's why I'm not going to discuss that very much, because also it's very personal. So what I understand for warm, colorful or sustain is quite personal. You need to make your own decision when it comes to these terminologies. So for the flamenco guitar, then we've seen that you can use rosewoods or hardwoods for the back and side, and for the front you can also have a variety of timbers. So now that we've decided what type of flamenco guitar we're going to make, all the other things that we're going to explain are exactly the same for both of them. So the next thing is the soundboard, okay? So I'm going to show you two different soundboards that I have here that I've got ready, or nearly ready. I probably have to do a little bit more work, but you know, we're nearly there with them. So here is what you have for a typical classical guitar. You have a 7-fan strut system with 2 closing bars at the bottom and a bridge plate. This is very much based on Hausa. Hausa also was probably originally based in Torres, and you can see this is really quite similar to Torres. What Torres didn't do is to use a bridge plate, and the struts were positioned slightly differently and the sizes were slightly different as well. But you know, basically it's a 7-fan strut with 2 closing bars. This is quite normal for classical guitar, and as I explained in the course that is available to purchase, there I explain, you know, how to build it, how I thin the edges a little bit more to get a little bit more freedom of movement around the edges where they tend to be quite stiff. So I'm not going to go a lot into that because all that information is there in the course. But when you go into the flamenco, again, this is a spruce top, and I chose to show a spruce top because it's the most common one to use. If you want to use cedar, it's fairly similar, but you will have to play with the flexibility of the cedar, which it changes a lot. Some pieces of cedar are really quite flexible, and some of the pieces of cedar are really a lot stronger and stiffer. So the thickness of your soundboard is going to be decided in relation to that. With spruce, you find that there's not such a huge range of flexibility, even though there's still quite a range. And in average, when you get a soundboard that is really good quality with very close grain, what you find, again, this is not standard, so you cannot apply this to every single guitar. Here you have to use your own wisdom and your own understanding of how thick the wood needs to be. What I will say is that in general, when the timber is very good quality, very well courtesan, so it means that the grain is very perpendicular along the edge, and the grain is also very tight, like it's in here. So what you will find, or what I do, is that normally the whole of the soundboard is around about 2.5 millimeters thick, but then around this area down the lower bouts on the edges about 50 millimeters in, but gradually I've thinned down these edges to about 2 millimeters. That way I achieve a soundboard that it's a little bit more flexible, keeping the weight in the middle. Then you also can see that from the top, or the top section of the soundboard, is very similar, if not identical, to the classical. But in the lower bout is where the main difference is. And here, again, you can do a variety of things, and you will find that there are many plans available online in different luthier suppliers. You can find different arrangements for the fan struts, and I'm not going to say that one is better than the other one. I think really you need to try them out to see what kind of response you get from your guitar and what you like. So if you only want to build one guitar, then you might have to do a bit of research as to which one you think is going to work best for you. This is a very, very common arrangement. So you have seven bars as a fan strut, and they don't go all the way down to the edge. Here they stop around about 30 millimeters. And the profile, it's like a half round, similar to what I do with the classical. I don't have a bridge plate, and the heights, you can see, they're not tremendously high either. To me, this is quite important because I want the soundboard to be quite free, to be able to vibrate comfortably when the guitar is being played. So in this one, the center strut is the highest one, is 4 millimeters high. This one is 3.5, this one is 3, this one is 2 millimeters high. The same in the other side. And they also slope down to be a bit thinner towards the lower perimeter of the guitar, okay, or the soundboard. So again, the idea is that the soundboard for the flamenco guitar needs to be a little bit more flexible because you want it to be a bit more responsive. And with the classical guitar, it's okay, you could do it like this as well, it will work fine. In my experience, what I find is that when you have a bridge plate and also closing bars at the bottom, you get a little bit more control as a player over the sound of the instrument. Excuse me. However, with the flamenco guitar, it's not so much like that. The sound is not as controllable, but that's not what a flamenco player is looking for. It's different qualities, which you probably know by now. Okay, so that's what I'm going to say about the soundboard. I think it's fairly straightforward, and I don't claim that this is all there is to it. It's just for you to get an idea of what one needs doing. The next point is the action. Now, the action is really, really important, and is perhaps to me is probably one of the most important elements of the flamenco guitar if you're going to compare it with the classical. Because the thing is that if you pick up a classical guitar and give it to a classical player, because of the technique, the guitar is going to sound in a certain way. But if you give exactly the same guitar to a flamenco player, also because of the technique is so different, the guitar, it's already going to sound very different. But there's a problem here, and it's that the action for a classical player needs to be high enough so that the strings don't touch the frets and you can produce a very clean sound, but not too high that it's uncomfortable to play. So you need to get that point where you are at that line. Clean sound, but not too high of an action that it's completely uncomfortable. It's the same sort of idea with the flamenco guitar, but with the flamenco guitar it's much more acceptable to have a sound that is not as clean, and it depends on the level that you want to get to, but you can have a little bit of buzzing with the sound of the flamenco guitar. So that's gonna make the flamenco guitar a lot more comfortable to play, because what it means is that you can have the strings a lot closer to the fingerboard. So to be able to have the strings closer to the fingerboard, there's a few things that we need to be doing. Now the action, we're going to look at those things in a moment, but the action for a classical guitar, in average, again, this is personal for each person, you might want to set it up a little bit different, and the guitar that you're looking in particular might need to be set up slightly different as well. But in average, what you have is that the treble is a 3mm action and the bass is a 4mm action. So the measurements that I'm giving you, it's the clearance of the string. So basically from the top of the fret to the bottom of the string. That is the dimension that I'm giving you. Also, that dimension is when you measure it at the 12th fret. So at the 12th fret, the clearance that you have between the top of the fret and the bottom of the string for the treble is 3mm, for the basses or for the 6th string it's 4mm. With that you get a fairly safe action for a classical guitar. For a flamenco guitar, however, it needs to be lower. That would be too high for any flamenco player. So the average action for a flamenco player would be 2.5 at the 12th fret, also measured basically in the same way. We always measure the action on the 12th fret, and it's always the clearance between the top of the fret and the bottom of the string. So for the flamenco guitar, in average, for the first string would be 2.5mm, and for the 6th string it would be 3mm. For some flamenco players, that it's a little bit of a high action for the basses, so they would choose to do 2.5mm all across. So basically the basses are really quite close to the fingerboard, and the chances are that it's going to be quite rattly. So this is a little bit where you need to think about pros and cons. You know, everything that you do to the guitar has good effects but also negative effects. So if the action is so low, you need to be aware that you're going to get, especially on the basses, quite a little bit of bassing, which it might be okay for the type of music that you're doing and for the type of flamenco that you want to do, but it's not for everybody. So you need to kind of discern where's the right place for you. But the reality is that to be able to achieve that kind of low action, we need to do some changes, or there are some differences in comparison to what you would do for the classical guitar. So that's where we're going to be looking at the fingerboard first. So in the video, and there's also a video on YouTube which is for free, you can have a look at it, and you'll see it's exactly very similar to what's already in the course, even though in the course, if you look into the video, which is specifically about the fingerboard, it explains the whole thing in complete detail. So what you find for free on YouTube is a bit of an introduction into it, and hopefully it'll be enough help. And basically, the idea is that when you work the fingerboard and you plane it, the face of the fingerboard, when you look at the projection of the fingerboard at the area where the bridge will go, for the classical guitar, you need to have a height of, let me think, 3.5mm for the treble side and 2.5mm for the bass side. And that is the same for the flamenco guitar if you want to have an action of 2.5 and 3. Now, if you want to have an action of 2.5 all across, which means that the bass is a bit lower, then it might be a good idea to keep the fingerboard evenly at 3.5mm, so that you don't reduce the height of the fingerboard at the base, because you want the fingerboard to be just a little bit closer to the strings without having to get the adjustments all in the saddle. And that leads me to the next part, which is the bridge. The bridge also needs to be a little bit lower in the flamenco guitar when you compare it to the classical. So I have a bridge plank. This is already being worked on, and you can see I've got a few slots cut in here, but this is kind of the first basic dimension that you want to have your bridge prepared to. So this is for a classical guitar, and the dimension that I have here is 29mm. By the time it's all cleaned up, it might end up being about 28. It's longer than it needs to be. We don't need to look into that now. But what I want you to see is that this is 8.1mm. So for a classical guitar, this is the starting point of the thickness of the bridge. And then by the time it's everything cleaned up, and also we're going to have an arch at the base of the bridge so that it matches the arch in the soundboard. So by the time you create an arch at the bottom here, what will happen is that you're going to keep the thickness in the ends, which later on it will be thinner because we're going to be carving the wings and everything. But basically, the center section is not going to be 8 millimeters anymore. So in the bridge of a classical guitar, it will go from 8 millimeters down to about 7.5. But the flamenco guitar needs to start at 7 millimeters. So basically, at this point, it could be 7. And then by the time you created the arch and you made the bridge and it's all cleaned up and you lost a little bit of thickness, what you're going to have is that the thickness of the bridge in the center section, it's around about 6.5 millimeters. So I've got one bridge here that is finished, it's ready. This is for a classical guitar, and you can see that this is 7.4 millimeters in the center. So for a classical guitar, this is great, ready to go. If it was a flamenco guitar, I would want to have about 6.5, 6.4 millimeters in the center section of the bridge. Now that's important because if you want to have the strings closer to the fingerboard, you also need to have a saddle which is a lot lower than the classical guitar. And just 1 millimeter difference in the height of the action on the 12th fret, it means that the saddle in the bridge needs to be 2 millimeters lower. So what does that mean? What it means is that if I have my bridge here in my slot and the saddle is sticking out maybe about 3 or maybe 4 millimeters maximum, if you want to, well, it would be probably between 2 and 3 millimeters of, the amount of saddle that would stick out, the amount of bone that would stick out in the bridge would be that maybe 2, 3 millimeters, 4 maybe, but around about 3 millimeters. And that's for an action of 3 and 4 millimeters for the classical. But if you're going to have 2.5 and 3, or even 2.5 and 2.5, it means that the saddle is going to be 2 millimeters lower here. So if the bridge wasn't a bit lower, you'll be already on the wood. So to have a little bit of saddle sticking up from the wood that you made the bridge with, then it means that this thickness needs to be a little bit less. Otherwise, you'll end up having problems here. So it's quite important that the thickness of the bridge needs to be lower than the thickness of the bridge for the classical guitar. Then the next point is that traditionally you have, for the classical and for the flamenco guitar, you have 6 holes in the tie block, and you only need 6 holes, one for each string. You only have 6 strings, so normally you have just 1 hole for each string. It's a much more modern concept to have 2 holes for each string. Some people even make 3 holes for each string, and that means that they can tie the string in a different way, which some people find that it's easier. Some people don't get on very well with it, they get a little bit mixed up and they want to use the old conventional 1 hole per string, which is also fine. And for the classical guitar, the implications are not huge. However, I like doing 12 holes for all the bridges that I do, for classical and flamenco, because you will get a better break angle of the string at this point where the saddle will go, because of the nature of and the way that the strings are tied in the bridge. But when it comes to a flamenco guitar with a very, very low action and with a very low saddle, in that case, I particularly like to having 12 holes rather than 6. And what that means is that the strings can be tied up in such a way that you have a little bit of break angle, especially on the first string, because I have so many clients who have come to me with guitars that, they sound great, but the first string especially, and sometimes the second string as well, are so losing clarity, and they're losing a lot of musical quality. And even though the flamenco guitar is not so focused on that, nevertheless, it's only a relative concept. You want to have a clear sound, you want to have a clean sound. So the reason is that if you hardly have a break angle for the first string because of the way that the string is attached, it means that you don't have enough pressure down from the string, and a lot of the energy is lost at that point. But when you have 12 holes, it means that you have a better break angle and the string is still pressed down enough to not to have that kind of problem. So basically, like I was saying, I have people who come to me with flamenco guitars with a very low action, a very low saddle, and they have problems, and when they tie the strings, because you only have one hole per string, it's quite difficult to sort out that problem. So if that's the case for you, it's possible to drill another hole next to the existing ones to transform a 6-hole bridge into a 12-hole bridge. I'm not going to explain that. That's perhaps the matter for another video, another time. If you guys are interested, then just drop me a line in the comments and say, yeah, we're interested or whatever. But that's a different story. But it's important to know, because if you're going to build a flamenco guitar from scratch, I think it's really a good idea to have 12 holes rather than just 6. And then finally, you need a scratch plate. Now, the scratch plate is really important for the flamenco guitar, because if you look at the classical, the techniques are much more clinical, much more clean, and the players tend to just touch the strings. Occasionally they will do some percussive techniques into the guitar, tapping in different places of the soundboard, or in the bridge, or in different areas, but they tend to do it really carefully, being very aware that the nails that they have, even in the left hand, when you have very short nails, they still can do a lot of damage to your guitar. So for a flamenco player, it's even more important, because what happens is that many of the techniques when you play flamenco involve alzapúa, which means that the nail of the thumb is going up, but also it's very common to rest the thumb in the 6th string, and you can end up having a huge amount of damage around here. I was saying here, but actually, you know, it usually happens around here. So I've seen many flamenco guitars where the rosette is completely destroyed in this area. But you have the same problem down here, because it's part of the technique of flamenco that you have to tap for certain effects. You want to tap on the soundboard, and if you don't have a scratch plate, you're going to end up having a hole here, because whether you use spruce or you use cedar, it's just too soft, and the guitar won't be able to handle that. So you will go from making a mess and lots of scratches to end up making a hole, and you want to avoid that. So what you need to do is to make sure that you fit in a good scratch plate. There are different options in the market. I would stay clear from those cling-on scratch plates that are kind of electrostatic, and they can be removed, because if you have a flamenco guitar that is French polish, they tend to damage the French polish. Doesn't matter how dry the French polish is, they tend to suffer. So if the guitar is, you know, you're gonna make a guitar and you're gonna finish it with anything else that is not French polish, but something tougher, like a synthetic lacquer or polyurethane or cellulose, once it's very dry, then you can use those kind of scratch plates. Otherwise, I would stay clear of them, and I would just fit a permanent scratch plate. And my recommendation as well is that very often you see a flamenco guitar that's got the scratch plate only on the treble side. My preference is to have it on the treble and the bass side, and also covering the rosette, so that you protect it, because you can inflict a lot of damage here. So this is basically the basic bullet points that you need to know to be able to build a flamenco guitar, following the instructions that I am already giving you in the video about how to build a classical guitar. So as you can see, a huge amount of the information that you get when you buy that course is exactly the same. And if you just bear in mind that before you start the construction of the instrument, you need to bear in mind these things to make sure that the end result is definitely a flamenco guitar, because you just want to make sure that you know what you're doing before you start building your instrument and before you start working with the videos that are available to purchase. So if you have any questions, please just drop me a comment and I'll try to reply the best way possible. And hopefully you got enough information here to build your flamenco guitar and you find this video useful. So thank you very much for watching, and until the next time.